so welcome to Concrete Gardens, Lotions and Potions. This time we're going to be looking at a calming, soothing, nourishing evening drink that you can have. Some of you might have heard of it referred to as golden milk or turmeric milk, which you can guess what the main component of it is. So golden milk or turmeric milk has been used for years as a kind of more spicy Ovaltine, I guess, a nice creamy, rich drink to have at the end of the day that helps to relax you, but it's also really good for a lot of your body systems in lots and lots of different ways. So the main component, turmeric, people are probably familiar with this. It's used a lot in cooking. We're using the powder for this, but you can often get turmeric root in the same way that you get ginger root, and they're actually from the same plant family, which is Zingiberaceae. So turmeric is Curcuma longa. It's very, very popular at the minute as a bit of a panacea, which means a thing that can cure absolutely everything. There seems to be an A to Z of things that turmeric can do. One of the key characteristics of that is that it's highly anti-inflammatory. So something that's anti-inflammatory, if you think about inflammation and things being kind of overexcitable, so things that reduce inflammation are also quite good for soothing and nourishing. And there's just there's almost like a very, very food-like element to turmeric, as well as being used in a kind of medicinal way. So we use turmeric with milk as a traditional way to use it. It would often be taken with something with some fat in it, which helps the absorption of a lot of the medicinal constituents in the turmeric. Historically, so in Ayurvedic medicine, which is practiced a lot in India, that would be with ghee, which is clarified butter. So you'd melt the ghee and add the turmeric and then kind of eat that. It's not something that most people in Scotland's palate has been attuned to, so having it as a milk I think is going to be a little bit easier for some people. The other thing that I'm going to add in with the turmeric is something that I just mentioned that you're going to be familiar with. So this is ginger powder, so another hot Zingiberaceae kind of a plant. It's actually called Zingiber officinale. And this is the powdered root that we're using on this occasion. What I would say about that is if you've got some ginger at home that you're thinking of using, have a good smell and see if it still has some good scent off it, because ginger can lose its potency quite quickly in powdered form. So you want to kind of have it as fresh as possible and store it in little small amounts like this. So what I tend to do is I get a big bag of dried ginger, put it away somewhere cool and dark, and then when I want to use it, I just take out small amounts like in a little jar like this, use that over a few weeks, and then go back to the large container. So it's a way of doing it so that you're getting best value for money of your ginger, but also it's not kind of losing its qualities. And this one is a really, really strong gingery punch. It really reminds me of like gingerbread and ginger nut biscuits. So we're putting it in because it's warming, it's also anti-inflammatory, and it also adds a really nice flavour. And it's something that's very traditionally paired with turmeric, partly because they're from the same plant family. So in the same way that you might pair things like things in the mint family, like rosemary and mint and sage, those sort of things all go together in the same way with spices, so looking at how those plant families come together. And then the third one is one that people might have heard of, but it's probably less familiar because it's not really used as a cooking spice here, and that's ashwagandha, or the Latin name is Withenia somnifera. And this is also a powdered root. So all of these, use in moderation, because obviously taking the root from a plant means that there isn't a plant anymore. So it's something that you want to kind of think about where you're getting it from. But the ashwagandha, so Withenia somnifera, the somnifera part of that, if anyone remembers any Latin or kind of things, these sort of things, that SOMN at the start, somn, is to do with sleeping. So Withenia is one of the type of plants that we call adaptogens, which also includes a lot of the ginseng. So people might have heard of them. They're very popular to take in tablet form, meant to be really good for immune health and stress and things like that. And that's what adaptogens do. They help your body to adapt to the stress situation. The difference with our Withenia somnifera, so the sleep element, is that it's not as punchy and stimulating as some of the other ones that you would get. So things like ginseng and, to a lesser extent, Siberian ginseng can be very, very kind of pushy and a little bit of a caffeine-y type thing, whereas Withenia is very soothing, very calming, just lets you get on with things. It doesn't actually put you to sleep, so it is absolutely fine to have during the day, but what it does do is it just makes your body find it easier to relax and to actually use your reserves of energy better. And that's often a problem when people aren't sleeping, is because they're getting overthinking and overexcited at night, when they've maybe if you're anxious or if you just have a lot going on, it can be really hard just to switch off that little bit at the back of your brain going, oh, I've forgotten something, I've got to do something, I've forgotten something. And all of that with ashwagandha, with withania, that'll help you to kind of help to do that. It's not in the same plant family as the other two, as the turmeric and the cinnamon, ginger. It's actually in the same plant family as potatoes and tomatoes and chilies and all of those. So it's a solanaceae. Many of which are plants which the berries of them are quite poisonous, and it's also sometimes called winter cherry because it's got these little cherry-like berries. But like with potatoes, so potatoes we eat the root, and with ashwagandha we use the root, but we avoid the little kind of berries that come on the little potato tomatoes because those are poisonous. So it's got some similarities with plants that grow very well here, but it tends to be used a lot more in Ayurvedic stuff. So to make the milk, what we're going to do is, now I'm not doing any dairy at the minute, so I'm going to use some oat milk, but just basically a milk of your choosing, and you just take a cup of that. So I'm just going to pour that into my cup. And we're just going to warm that with the spices to create the turmeric milk. So we've got our cup of milk, any kind of milk that you fancy. I'm going for the oat milk because I quite like that. What I would say is, if you're doing alternative milks, rice milk is quite salty, so you might not want to use that. And but a lot of the other ones, like the nut milks, they're good if you use the unsweetened kinds. And soy milk if you like that as well. What I would say is, if you ever find it, avoid quinoa milk because it is absolutely horrible. So to your cup of milk, you add a teaspoon of turmeric. And I like to give that a wee wipe because the turmeric tends to stain the other spices, or just using your spoon. And a teaspoon of ginger, or maybe slightly less of the ginger. Give that a wee wipe as well. And your ashwagandha. And then I'm just going to give that a bit of a stir. And as you stir, your milk starts to go golden. So that's your turmeric. Turmeric's really strong. Just get everything just dissolved. And then, like with most things that you're heating, that you're wanting to have some medicinal properties to them, you just pop on the lid and just let that warm. Really, all of the medicinal properties are already in there. What you're doing by warming it is just making it nicer to drink, basically. Whereas for other things, we're not going to strain this, you're going to drink it as is. So for other ways of making things via decoction, you would be taking the plant matter out afterwards, whereas this really is just warming something. So if it's easier, do it in the microwave, that's absolutely fine. And then when it's finished, you'll have this kind of lovely, thick, creamy, golden milk. Yeah, and really tangy, really, really taste. If you get to know the idea of what the withania tastes like, it's even handy to try a little dab of it to work that out. You can taste all three of the different spices really come through in the milk, and it's just a very soothing, just a nice warm drink to have before you go to bed for the winter. Today we're looking at making a marigold infused sugar scrub, which is a kind of two-stage process. We're going to make an infused oil, and then we're going to combine the infused oil with sugar to make the sugar scrub. And this is a particularly nice one. I've called it a gardener's hand soothing sugar scrub. It's a really nice one for if you've got really resiny stuff on your fingers from plants. I used this when I was picking pine cones last year. Ended up with actually like my thumb and my first finger were stuck together with resin, and I got my sugar scrub out from under the cupboard under the sink and just rubbed and rubbed and rubbed, and the oil oozed the resin off, and the sugar just gives you that little bit of friction to help clear it. So it's really good if you would be a very good mechanics soothing hand scrub as well. Anyone who's getting oily or gunky things on their hands, or who just fancies a nice soothing hand scrub. So the reason that we're using marigold for this is that, so this is marigold flowers and petals. They have a lovely kind of honey aroma, so it's very kind of soothing and nice in that respect. But also they have marigold flowers have a really strong affinity with the skin. So marigold is Calendula officinalis, and apparently it's called calendula because it's meant to be that it can flower every month of the calendar year. I haven't found that to be the case in Scotland, but I think maybe a bit further south in the UK that might happen. So the infused oil of marigold is highly anti-inflammatory. It's really good for soothing any kind of damaged skin, and it's also very safe to use. You find a lot of kind of marigold creams and things like that for babies and for breastfeeding mums and that kind of thing. So it's a very, very kind of calming, soothing sort of thing to use. I've also included as a possibility as well, you could add some lavender. That adds like a little bit of an additional scent and flavour to it. But I'm conscious lavender isn't everybody's thing. I think some people it reminds them of elderly relatives or some sort of like experiences and strange things to do with lavender. So don't always have to put the lavender in. We're going to go for the marigold first of all. So 2 methods of making an infused oil, the long option and the short option. We're going to go for the shorter option today because it's the colder months. The longer option, you probably do need a little bit more sunshine and sunlight than we have at the moment. So the longer option is you combine your plant material and your oil in a jar, pop it on a sunny windowsill and leave it for a couple of weeks. Check in every day to make sure that the plant material stays beneath the level of the oil. And you can rig yourself up with little contraptions to do that, put little chopsticks across, or I don't know if you've ever got those the kind of peppers that you get in jars. Often they have a little plastic insert that keeps them underneath the oil. If you can hold onto one of those jars, you can use that for that sort of thing. The method we're using, you don't have to worry about that. You can just, what we're going to do is get a bain-marie, which is a warm water bath, and heat the marigold and the oil for several hours. So minimum 2, but 4 to 6 would be ideal. So that all of the kind of plant goodness comes out into the oil. And then we strain that with a muslin and a little sieve, and you've got your oil to use to make your sugar scrub. So what I would say as well with marigold, with some plants, it's a shame if you're having to use dried because they don't have such a strong flavour. With marigold, it is kind of mandatory that you use dried, and that is because if you try to make an infused oil with fresh marigold, especially if you're using the long method, which is leaving it for a couple of weeks on a windowsill, you really run the risk of it going mouldy. And that's because there's such a high water content. If you've ever seen fresh marigold petals, they're almost juicy, would be a word you could use for them. And there's just so much water in there that you really, too much of it absorbs into the oil. So even if you use the quick method, there's always a risk that quite a lot of the water has come out into the oil, and the oil won't be very, what you probably call shelf stable. So you would need to keep it in the fridge, or alternatively, you could add a kind of vitamin E capsule or something like that to help preserve it, but is really by far the best option, and the only option that I would use is to use your dried marigold. So our first step, we've got our jar here. We're going to put about 1/3 fill with the marigold. So I'm just going to probably droplets of marigold, but that's fine. So for me, that's probably a couple of 2 or 3 little handfuls of that. So now marigold is one of these plants that's got this weird, very electromagnetic thing that does tend to go everywhere and stick to everything. I think there is a technical physics reason for that, but I'm not quite sure what it is. So don't worry if you feel like you're making a bit of a mess with your marigold. That's just what marigold does. And because of that as well, it's quite spaced out. So I'm going to put a good 3 large pinches into this, maybe just a little bit more. If you can imagine, there's quite a lot of air spaces around this that the oil's going to fill in between. So if I flatten that right down, I can press that right down, which I think is quite a good idea to do. Try and get it all sticking with each other. That's kind of between 1/3 and 1/2. I'm then going to take my oil, and I've just got a kind of standard, this is just sunflower oil or vegetable oil. You don't want to use any kind of particularly fancy oils because you're warming them, and that just doesn't really help. It doesn't add anything at all. Once you've warmed them, they're not that great. And then just very, very slowly, or as slowly as you can, and it's just kind of pour the oil like slowly and regularly onto there. And what you're trying to do is drench the marigold in oil almost before the oil gets over it, so that most of it just stays naturally underneath there. So we've got the oil and the marigold, and there's just some tiny bits floating to the top, but not too many. So we put the lid on lightly, and the next step is we're going to put it onto a bain-marie. So the bain-marie, I've got it prepared here already with some water in it. So I've got a saucepan, and the clinking sound you can hear is this is just like a little saucer that's the same size as the base of the saucepan. Pop that in, covered that with warm water, And then we can place the marigolds and oil in there, and we're just going to put that on the heat to warm for a few hours. So we put the bain-marie, which is the saucepan with the warm water, we just put that onto a really quite low heat. You want that just to gently warm. The lid here is helping to keep some of the heat in, but it's also helping to keep some of the properties of the plants in so that the marigold essential oils and volatile oils aren't all kind of flying off into the room. The saucer is there, it kind of lifts your jar off the base so that the jar isn't getting the kind of direct heat, so it's not, because you wouldn't want to burn the oil or burn the marigold, so that's the gentle heat, and the saucer lifts a little bit. The saucer is also a wee indicator for you if the heat's getting too much, because if any bubbles start to form, like it's starting to boil, the saucer will start to clatter about a little bit, and that'll be an alert for you that you need to turn that right down again. You can also do this in a slow cooker, and that's like, you could just leave that for absolutely ages, and in that case you would just put your saucer in the base of the slow cooker, put your jar on top, fill with water to kind of part way up the jar, and then just leave that on a low setting for absolutely ages. You can do that for as long as you like. And then when that's been done for a few hours, like I say, we strain it off. You can discard your oily marigold, squeeze as much out of it as you possibly can, and then you end up with what we have here, which is a nice bright yellow marigold oil. So we've got our marigold infused oil, and we've got this slightly coarse grainy sugar. So it's probably more like a granulated sugar than anything else, really. And what I tend to do is add the sugar first and then pour the oil in. You're wanting roughly 50-50 of sugar to oil, but it will just depend a little bit on exactly the sugar that you've got, how much absorbs. And you want the final point to be where all of the sugar has some oil on it, but you don't really have any oil sitting on its own aside. Everything's perfectly combined. So I'm just going to add my sugar. And then I'm going to pour in some of my oil. Oh, if I can open my oil. Managed not to spill any, that was quite good. So maybe pour in maybe a third of this just to get started. And then I'm just going to mix that. And you want to combine it like really, really gently. So already we're getting to the point here with just that small amount of oil that you could use that as a scrub if you wanted a really rough scrub. But for me, if I'm going to kind of keep it in a jar, I would probably want a bit more oil than that. I'm going to do that. And the smell, you can smell the kind of, so marigold has a really lovely kind of honey-like smell to it. So that with the sugar just gives you a really, really sweet mix. Now for me, and in fact I feel like I'm baking doing this. For me, that's probably about right, but you might want it slightly more oily. And if you do go kind of like, if you obviously put too much oil in, if you have some more sugar, you can just put sugar in. But also, if you find that when you put it into so we're going to put this into this container, if you find that it separates out between the oil and the sugar a little bit, that's absolutely fine. Just give it a little mix up. And that'll, because it sometimes does tend to settle a little bit, and that will depend on things like, are you moving the jar around a lot? Is it sitting somewhere for a long time? What's the temperature like in the place that you're keeping it? So like most things, it's happiest in a cool, dark place, but there is a tendency to keep stuff like this in your bathroom because it's handy and it's to hand and it's near a sink. But that's absolutely fine. If it separates slightly, you just remix it. So I'm just going to put this in the jar. So we've got a lovely, sweet, soothing gardener's hand scrub. Go, and then just the last little bit. And just pop the lid on that. And just label that, and there you've got your gardener's hand scrub.